Have you ever wondered about life's biggest questions? Like, why am I here? What happens when we die? Or what else is out there? Well, we have, and we love to talk about it. And if you're listening, we think you probably do too. I'm Robyn.
And I'm Karen. And we've spent our lives searching for those answers, and we're seekers just like you.
We'll be talking to some of the most fascinating spiritual teachers, healers, and scientists, and showing you how you can use some of their spiritual practices for yourself.
We'll also be sharing stories of other seekers to motivate you to live your fullest life.
And we'll be translating it all, so the spiritual stuff won't feel so out there.
So if you're curious, get ready to rediscover why we're here together.
When you hear the word or term shaman, what do you think of? If you're like me, you think of a Native American man that is going to take you on a walkabout. Drugs or the inhalation of plant medicine may be involved. Well, I can tell you firsthand that is not always the case. Meet Sheryl Netzky. She's an energy alchemy practitioner with more than 30 years of experience. She has been an integral part of unlocking the power I have within and helping me to fulfill my soul's purpose. Sheryl does not do drugs, nor does she give drugs to any of her clients.
Sheryl has worked with renowned healers and shamans around the world. She has trained and mentored hundreds of global shamanic energy medicine practitioners. She now works with purpose-driven entrepreneurs, CEOs, their families, and teams all over the world. Sheryl helps unblock themselves and their companies. By doing this work, every product and service they create becomes more aligned with the divine. Sheryl is here to help as many of us as possible. She and Spirit seem in many ways to be one. We're excited to introduce the wise and wonderful Sheryl.
What is a shaman?
So in terms of like what is a modern day shamanic energy practitioner, or somebody who's trained in the ways of the indigenous tribe, and there are many different forms of shamanism that are practiced around the world. The lineage that I've studied with and have been schooled in is based and rooted in the Q'ero lineage that are the people who predate the Inca people in Peru. And that is part of the work that I practice. So it's a modern day medicine man or woman who is able to connect into the less visible world in order to create true transformation and healing anything from broken bones. Some healers are working to help people heal from cancer. Some people are working to heal the disease of our culture, the inside out, upside down ways, the out of balance ways, to bring us back into a deeper alignment of health. Even in modern shamanism, there is very much an awareness of what science calls one health, which is that humanity's health is connected to the planet's health, is connected to the tree's health, is connected to the animal's health. It's one health. We're not separate from. You can't cut down tear down or burn down the rainforest, which is our primary source of oxygen, and have it not affect human life. So in traditional terms, before Western medicine, we lived in tribes. And in every tribe, there was someone who was the healer in the tribe. So it was the medicine man or woman who often had suffered some kind of hardship in their life earlier. Like maybe they were the child that fell out of the tree and broke their arm, or maybe they were the one who got bit by a snake and somehow alchemized the poison and lived. So in a certain way, it's kind of like the Harry Potter story, like he was the child that lived, right? And there is that alchemy to him that he can, in that character of Harry Potter, he can go into these different scenarios and alchemize the darkness into light. It speaks to that hero's journey or heroine's journey in us. So a shamanic energy practitioner, or a shaman in traditional terms, is known to have healing properties, alchemical properties, to move from sickness to wellness, and then could help other people move from sickness to wellness, and has a relationship with the natural world, understands that trees have life force energy in them, and stones have life force energy in them, and the earth itself is a living, breathing organism, and animals have life force energy in them. So people who still to this day, grow up in the mountains of Peru, they grow up and they can dip their hand into the air above the earth, and they start learning how to track where the water is from miles away. Come on, how can they sense that? But we believe in our garage door openers. We push a button And there's these radio waves that then open the garage door. How could a species like humanity create something like a garage door opener or a TV remote control that sends waves of energy across time and space in less visible ways and have an action happen? How could we create that if the original matrix for that did not already exist? So shamanic energy practitioners were the healers of the tribe. They could sense the less visible world, and they could create shifts and change. And they could track across time, backwards and forwards in time, to sense things like where water was, which if you have a herd of llama and you need to get them to water, it's a very practical tool.
And then for you, taking that definition of both traditional and modern shamanic practice, and then who you are, you like to say that you're an energy alchemy teacher. What does that mean?
Alchemy means a transformation. So it's taking something from a solid state to a liquid or an ether state. So like an ice cube, like we put water in the freezer and it goes from a liquid state to a solid state, right? Or we put that same ice cube in a pot, we can put heat on it and we can melt it from a solid state to a liquid state to an ether state. Well, sometimes the imprints that we have in our body, it can lead people to choosing the same abusive relationship over and over and over again. And it can feel like I got this solid imprint in me. My life will never change, which isn't, of course, the truth. But if somebody's been doing that same pattern for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and suffering, it sure can feel solid. And so what an energy alchemy teacher would do or practitioner would do is go in and help the person to release that imprint from that solid state to that liquid state to the ethers so that it doesn't live in them in the same way. So it's about transformation.
For some people who are so new to this language, I think it's helpful for them to have a good definition of it. So thank you. And people should know I've worked with Sheryl and I've gotten to know her over several years, and she is one of the most powerful people that I've ever met. How do you sense energy and how can others sense it?
I am multisensory in how I experience the energetic vibrational world. Vibrational is, I think, a way to help understand energy in the terms that we're talking about it. It's that energy vibrates. And when you have sensitivities to that and pattern recognition with that, you can begin to sense the different vibratory qualities of energy. So I sense it multisensory, which means I see energy, I hear energy, I smell energy, something called empathic, which means that you feel what's happening in other people's systems as if it's happening in your own. In terms of how can anybody sense energy? Everybody listening to this call today senses energy. Everybody on the planet senses energy. Some of us sense it more. Some of us are more attuned and awake to feeling it. Some of us are more attuned and awake to seeing it. And when I talk about seeing energy, a lot of people have a deep fascination with this because our culture and our vestibular systems are sight-oriented. So seeing is believing. So even the name of your show, Seeking, it's a sight-based concept, right? So we really value seeing. So the concept that somebody could see the less visible world feels like something that everybody wants. Like everybody wants that way of knowing in the world. Most people come in seeing energy, but because it's not affirmed or validated, there's not language for it, and it gets kind of just pressed down and suppressed. It's a little bit like looking at a 3D image, and some people could see like the man's face pop out of the image, and other people are like, I don't see it. And then all of a sudden something clicks and you can see it. And seeing energy is like that. It's there all the time, but it's almost like somebody just pulls up a veil. So you might start seeing light auras around a tree or around somebody's face or body or head. You might start noticing even just subtle things, like some people you want to be closer to and some people you want to stand farther away from. How many of us have walked into a room where people have been talking about us, but we didn't hear them talking about us, but we walk into the room, everybody gets quiet, and you sense that people have just been saying something about you. And you can tell whether they've been saying something positive about you or critical about you. How can you tell? What's your way of knowing? Do you feel something in your body? Do you kind of hear their words even in your own head, even though they're not speaking? Do you see like a density or a darkness in the room? Do you smell something that smells sour or bitter or an unusual scent? And sometimes taste too. Some people are sensory play with taste. And so you get these affirmations, and those are really helpful to building your own intuitive bank account of your own belief structure of, well, how do we believe something if we can't see it? And so those are very affirming moments and help people to increase their own intuition. Much of what is so painful right now on the planet and in our nation is this place of what is true and what is being made up. And how can two things that look polarized both be true? Like, how can that be?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not both true, then do we have to go into denial to believe one side or the other? And gosh, denial can be so familiar.
How do you answer that question, Sheryl, from a spiritual perspective?
I think that there is a resonance to truth. We can hear the resonance of truth when somebody says something, because the words are containers that hold the vibration of the divine. Some people who may be listening or watching may be thinking, well, what if I don't know? Like, what if I don't know what truth sounds like? How do I figure it out? And I think there's this place of inside of us, there's this little voice, that every time we listen to it, when it kind of taps us on the shoulder and says, hey, you really want to listen to Latin music, or hey, you really want to watercolor paint. That little voice. And then there might be this other voice in us that says, yeah, you don't have time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's not going to be productive. Like, watercolor painting, I mean, what are you going to get out of that? Like, you've got dishes to clean, and you've got work to do, and you've got children to tend to, or all these other things you need to do, put it aside. And so it's this beautiful journey of like, well, if we're always listening, which voice are we listening to?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we, every time we listen to that depth of us that is speaking through that divinity itself, through us, to us all the time, every day, every time we listen, it gets stronger. Every time we ignore it, what we've done, like whatever we do, there's a beautiful teacher, Buddhist meditation teacher, Pema Chodron, and she has this beautiful phrase. She says, whatever we do, we strengthen. So if we're going to listen to that bullying voice inside of us that says, oh, you don't have time for that. You don't have time for your joy. You don't have time to do this. It doesn't make sense. And come on, like, you've got chop, you've got things to do, right? And I'm not saying to not be responsible in our lives. I'm not saying to, not take care of the things. But if all our lives, it's that place of, are we going to be human doings? Or are we going to be human beings? And how do we continue to allow that space of that divine voice to move through us as us, and in a way that we listen and we listen. Mm-hmm. So Steven Spielberg wrote about like, listen to the whispers of your life. And it's like God is always whispering to us. The divine supreme consciousness, spirit source, whatever we want to call it, is always whispering to us. And if we're not going to listen, because earlier in our childhood, maybe somebody didn't listen to us, maybe over and over again, there just was, one of our grown folks who was a traumatized child in an adult body, just like many of us are, right? And they were doing the best that they could, and they loved us and wanted to do right by us, but maybe their own trauma places, they were so preoccupied with whatever challenges were on their plate, they couldn't really listen. So then we patterned, don't listen to yourself. Mm-hmm. Listen to the outside, listen to what other people want you to do, but don't listen to yourself. What it becomes is a call to action. What it becomes is, like, if we're going to listen to other people's wishes for us for our whole lives, guess what our lives are going to look like? We're going to get farther and farther from that divine source energy whisper inside of us. And it's going to get quieter, not because the voice is not still strong, not because we're not still connected, not because we can't hear it, but because it's so cloaked over with a blanket that we put over and a coat. And, oh, let me just put these pillows and maybe this old box of stuff. It gets so cloaked over that it becomes really hard to listen. And then we need to go in and do our personal work. And whether it's meditation, whether it's shamanic energy work, whether it's whatever form of energy medicine that you are drawn to, we need to go in and begin to create a pathway to listen. And it can be so simple.
Well, and I love what you said. Are we going to be human beings doings
or human beings?
Yeah.
That was speaking loud and clear to me. And I think probably to a lot of people right now, because I think we do a lot of doing to avoid looking at ourselves and looking at all those truths. It's so much easier to do than really take that time to go within and listen.
Definitely. And how did you recognize that you had these gifts?
I got really drawn to yoga and really wanted to study yoga. And it was before yoga was popular. So this was over 20 years ago. When I started really studying deeply, things started healing in my own body. And I became quite fascinated. And I wanted to understand, like, how is this happening? It made no academic sense. I was one of those straight A kind of academic students, and yet it was real and it was happening. And I became deeply, deeply curious and studied as a yoga instructor. What started happening was I was standing in a yoga class, and we began with an opening invocation. And when we began with that invocation, I looked across the room and I could see the lines of energy on the man across from me. And I could see where it was blocked and where it was flowing. And I could see at his knee, it was not flowing, but in other parts of his body, it was flowing. And it looked like I was looking at a meridian map. And there was a moment of deep fascination. And I was scared to look away, honestly, because I didn't want to lose the ability to see. But I did have the courage to look away and look at other people. And what I saw was that I could see that same energetic on other people too. And I could see where the energy was moving and where it was stuck. And at the end of that class, I had driven that day to class with a friend of mine who has given me permission to share this story. She's a doctor. She and her husband are both doctors, and they were having difficulty conceiving. And they had tried naturally and they had tried through medical science ways, and nothing was working. I just had this knowing that I was supposed to offer to work on her during Shavasana. So at the end of that class, I went and offered that to her. She knew I was not trained, and I knew I was not trained, but she said yes. And my hands hovered over her uterine area, and I could sense on one side of her uterus and on one ovary that there was a blockage. And I just asked and communicated with her body what needed to happen, and things opened. And then we left that day. And a few days later, she walked into my house, and I just looked at her, and I kind of just looked at her uterus, and I could see, like you would see like on an ultrasound or MRI machine, I could see two blinking lights that looked like embryos. And I didn't want to say anything. So I just said, hey, when's your next doctor's appointment? And she said, oh, it's in 2 days. I said, great, call me after. So she called me after and she said, Sheryl, you're not going to believe this, but I'm pregnant. And I said, that's amazing. And she said, yep, there were 2 embryos and 1 is viable. And his name is Graham, and he is now 16 or 17 years old. That's when I first realized, and then in hindsight, I was able to kind of unpack and put it all together of how the skills developed. I listened and I studied, and I let myself be drawn to what I was organically drawn to. And I also was reading lots of books that were spiritual in nature that I was also drawn to, and something opened. I got to see that there was a real service that was provided to this couple that deeply, deeply wanted a child. And so I got to see the value of listening and offering and showing up.
So inspiring how you had the courage to follow your inspiration.
What's also helpful for others to hear too, you had some inklings of this gift from when you were young.
In childhood, how we learn to unpack our ways of knowing and begin to trust them is a lifelong journey. Sometimes people start to download through dream time. So I was a very young girl, and I woke up one morning and went to the kitchen, and my family was in the kitchen. And I said, Mom, Dad, I had this dream last night, and our neighbor next door, she had her baby, and it was a girl, and she had brown eyes, and they named her this. And my parents just looked at each other and their jaws kind of dropped. Our neighbor next door did have her baby that night, and it happened while I was sleeping, and she did have brown eyes, and they did name her that name. Again, it wasn't like everybody in my household was celebrating that I had these knowings. I really didn't know if I was in trouble or not from the look my parents gave each other so little, right? But we have these ways that we're connected all the time. So I share that story in hopes that maybe somebody else, it jars a memory for someone of their own knowingness. Now, we need to be full of care when we're interpreting dreams, because it doesn't necessarily, there's different textures, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time. They're not always that literal, and they're frequently not that literal. Flash forward, my father's family came from a whole lineage of costume designers in Europe. And so he was the one who took me shopping most of the time. And there was a whole training that happened that I wasn't aware of at the time. But I would go to one rack and I would pick up a sweater and he would say, no, that has Angora in it. That's rabbit hair. You could be allergic and you could kind of itch from that. So put that down. And he could see that from like 2 aisles over. He knew the texture of the fabric. His eye could sense, and it trained my eye to sense the difference between a polyester fabric or a satin fabric or a cotton fabric or a wool fabric. And in so doing, again, it's pattern recognition. So a lot of intuition. We don't talk about it. People just think it's like this amorphous thing out there that either you have it or you don't. But so much of intuition is actually pattern recognition, that you do it enough times that you can sense when something is on and something is off, like a musician can sense when the instrument is attuned and when it's not, how to bring it into attunement. So my father was attuning my eyes to fabric, not so that I could see energy. That was not his intention consciously, but that's actually what happened in hindsight, unpacking it. There were other moments as well as when I first started teaching yoga. And what happened was that after class, people started coming up and reporting these kind of miraculous healings that had happened in their body where I had touched them to make an adjustment. And they wanted to know how I did it. And it was like so many of these that I couldn't deny that there was something going on, but I had no idea how it was happening. And in hindsight, unpacking it, the combination of my father training my eye and a lot of years of teaching in classroom. I taught almost every grade from preschool to graduate school. Most of the time I taught in high school, and for 20 years layered on top of that, I taught teachers how to teach reading and writing differently. And so in the classroom, what happens is we talk about teachers as having this sixth sense or eyes in the back of their head. And if you're teaching in a public middle school or high school, like it's really important to have that sixth sense, and even elementary school. And so I had learned quite the hard way how to move my body through the room to keep the discussion going, but just gently place my hand on Johnny's desk before he throws the spitball at Anna, who he really has a crush on, across the room, to stop the whole thing before it actually happens and keep the discussion going. So I had learned to find the hot spots. And in learning to find the hot spots in the room, what I learned when I worked on my friend in the yoga class and in Shavasana was that my system, my hands knew where the hot spots were, not just in my classroom, but they knew where the hot spots were in any organism. So a human body as an organism, or a business as an organism, or a nonprofit as an organism, you can sense where it's leaking and you can sense where it's blocked, and you can communicate with the system and listen deeply to hear what it needs to be able to shift to deeper wellness.
What led you from yoga and energy healing to that next step on your journey?
Some people who may be listening to this call right now may feel like, well, I already have a master's degree in this, or I have a bachelor's degree in this, or I have this many years of doing this type of work, or decades. How do I make a transition? Or some people who really love what they're doing, but they want to do it with more heart. They want to do it more aligned. They want to be a healing presence in whatever modality they're here to serve in. And they want shamanic training or energy medicine or energy alchemy training to be able to show up more aligned and attuned, to be able to serve from that place, so that every service and product that we create is more attuned to what we want to leave to our children's children. The part of sharing a story, whether it's my story or someone else's, is you get to kind of hear, gosh, that's not linear. She has an undergrad in psychology and English. And the English was quite by accident because I couldn't get into my psychology classes, yet I became an English teacher. And then I got a master's degree in education and teaching certificate. And then I was teaching teachers, and then I got a yoga certificate, but I wasn't really sure. It wasn't called really to teach yoga, but really you stack it all together. And what has happened is that I'm still teaching literacy. I'm teaching energy literacy. I'm teaching how do we learn to read and write our lives as we'd like them to be, not as we were socialized to have them be. A lot of our culture has been inside out, upside down, which we haven't quite talked about yet. But if we've been socialized by a culture that's inside out, upside down, where the values are inside out, upside down, then we don't necessarily want to read and write our lives according to that inside outness, or we will suffer. It's really quite that simple. In terms of what led me into the shamanic practice and path, I was in my own seeking phase, figuring out which form of energy medicine was I most called called to. I knew that I had some type of gift that I had to do something with. I knew there were indigenous maps into the places, into the realms that I was traveling into. And I knew that I did not know them yet. And I wanted to learn. And so I prayed. We haven't talked about this yet, but I was trained in meditation when I was 14 or 15 years old by Northwestern University. And that has very much played into my journey. I saw at a very young age that my thoughts affected my physiology. And that was paramount for my journey, that I knew that the less visible world was real. Kind of flashback up to what led me into the shamanic journey. I was a reluctant shaman, to be frank, like shamanic practitioner. My neighbors growing up were engineers and dentists, and my dad was an attorney and an accountant. My mom was a school teacher. I did not grow up thinking, yeah, I'm going to be a shaman. I didn't tell everybody, like, I'm going to be a shamanic energy worker when I grow up. But there was this one day where I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I went to one of my favorite bookstores called Crazy Wisdom. I was looking and reading different things, and I went to this one section. There was a shamanism section, and I was drawn to this one video from the school I wound up studying and training and becoming a teacher in, and then eventually leaving and doing work on my own. I'm walking up to the counter to buy this video thinking, I had young children at the time, why am I buying a video for myself? I watch them once. I never watch it again. Like, this is not practical. And I had that kind of critical mind coming up. And then I had this other part of me saying, yeah, but you need to buy the video. I'm sure no one on the call can relate to that moment of like left brain, right brain.
Right.
Right.
Never.
Right. And I bought the video. I went home and I watched it. And there were these signs that I had been seeing in my meditation, like a sunflower and an eye. And I just knew inside of me that I was supposed to study in that school. Once I started, I still had to really come to terms with the word. And also, I think it's important to also talk about cultural appropriation. You know, I did not grow up in the Karo lineage, and I did not grow up inside of a Karo tribe with Karo elders surrounding me and teaching me every step of the way. It's my deep hope and prayer that I am honoring the lineage enough. I hope that people also, if you're curious, that you look up the Karo elders, Q''ERO, before it became acceptable socially to go this path. The way that people like me were trained was that we were invited into something called a mystery school. And that was my first formal training. I was invited into a mystery school and exposed me to everything from tarot to partner experiences to hearing the head of the program, whose name was Jackie Matheny. She's since passed. The program is no longer in existence, so I can't refer people to it. But she gave this one lecture that I still remember to this day. It was on what do we center our lives around? If you're going to center your life around how much money you have or how little money you have, then it's going to look like a roller coaster. She goes through a whole series of these, and then she brings us to so what can you center your life around? And what she helped us see was our relationship with the divine is the only constant. And people on the call might be listening and saying, yeah, but it's not constant for me. That's nice, Sheryl, but could you break that down a little bit? That goes back to the whispers. The more we listen, the deeper we listen. And I would very much like to support people in learning these practices in these ways. If there are people who are interested in learning specific practices with the land, if we have very eco-friendly and very land-based people on the call that are interested in land shaman work, they can email me directly and I can get them in. I can see if it's a good fit to get them in touch with a place that they could study. And I do one-on-one work with people, and I do teach inside of the one-on-one work. Beginning of the journey is always to do our personal work.
That's a perfect segue to talk about how do you work with my own experience. We talked for a few minutes, and very quickly you said, you're supposed to have your own show. And I remember being like, what? How do you know that? I've never told anybody that I wanted to have my own show, but I did. It was at the right time in my life where I was searching for how do I start to fulfill what I came here to do. And it was at that moment when you said that things for me started to click and wheels started to move. And you said, I can help you with that.
Just before we go there, I just want to add to what Robyn was saying, because I remember when I had just really started connecting with Robyn at that point, and she was going to see you that weekend. I talked to her right before she left. When she came back, she was able to articulate that to me and everyone she worked with that, no, I'm going to have a show. Like there was a real shift in her whole ability to believe in herself and see that vision after that weekend with you.
Yes. And it was doing that work. And I remember you said to me, I can help you with that. And this is how it could work. Think about it. And pretty quickly decided that I wanted to make that commitment to myself. The moment I did, within several hours, you sent me such specific questions about what I wanted to do and how I would do that and why I would do that. I still refer to the answers to those questions today, 2 years later. Everything, including just that very beginning and really letting spirit come through me to answer those questions was such a gift. And then what Karen said, to be able to articulate and then act upon what my soul came here to do. And it's obviously not just about a show, as we all know. It's really about helping awakening people to why they came here and helping to connect them with the right people to help them do that. That's what I came here to do. And you helped me get on the journey and get back on my destiny path, which we can talk about what that is. You helped me do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's
thank you too, by the way.
That's right.
Because I wouldn't be here either.
Thank you.
So let's talk about how your sessions work. What are some, I know that there's many things that you do, but what are some of the key things that you help people recognize within themselves?
Yeah, so sessions generally work. I'm working mostly on Zoom right now, but even prior to the pandemic, I was working mostly on Zoom, to be honest. About 95% of my work was remote, either on video or phone call. I don't actually need the video because you're seeing the energetics, right? Inside of a session, first, it's somebody is listening or hears somebody else's story and feels like, you know what, there's like a calling. I think ultimately is that I'm a soul level ally. And so, when Robyn shares her story and says, I've never told that to anybody, but you heard it within here. And it's not really that I'm so fancy. I would say it's more of is pattern recognition. I've done a lot of hours of this work and I've really been a serious student. It's very much my soul level work to do this work. And you can hear it. You may not have felt like you said it out loud, but it was as if I heard it out loud. In the moment, I was just telling you back what you had told me. So I was a former English teacher. I was trained to hear the theme of the story. So that's what I'm listening to when I'm working one-on-one with somebody, is I'm listening to be an ally. And often we've never had an ally to that part of us. We might have had an ally to our intellect. We might have had an ally to our feelings or emotions. We might have had an ally to our body, but we haven't had necessarily a spirit ally or a soul level ally or an energy ally. And I'm listening, using all of the skills that live in me to hear what is that spirit's journey? What is that person here to do and be, that if at the end of their life, it's not done, they don't get to put like a check in the done box of the life journey. And I really believe that we're each here to do our bliss. And that doesn't mean that our work isn't hard, but it still is blissful when we're in alignment with that soul level part of who we are and whom we're here to be, and we're walking that out into the world. Sometimes people hear that and they think, oh, I've got to change jobs. That's not always the case. They can be that same profession, but do it in an aligned way with spirit. Like I could have stayed and been a teacher. By the time I left teaching, I could have stayed, but it wasn't my highest level calling, and there became an opportunity to move. So coming back to how do I work one-on-one with people? It's inside of session. I'm listening. I'm asking questions. I'll send a form to people, a set of questions that Robyn spoke about that was very helpful for her. It's a baseline assessment because I'm very interested in making sure that we're measuring growth. And so usually within 1 to 3 sessions, people experience a major shift of some sort. There are some situations that I do an immersion for. So somebody would come in and we'd spend a day and a half or 2.5 days together, or somebody will fly me out to their location and we'll do a day and a half or 2.5 days together there, or a longer period, or people will fly me into their company to do a presentation on how to have a really honest conversation. And inside of a session, if I'm doing one-on-one work, to kind of flip back to that here, after Q&A and after the questionnaire is sent, then we're either doing a guided journey form of meditation where I am teaching people, and I'll send the recording to them afterwards, how to traverse the inner mindscape themselves and become a better ally for their own spirit. And if we're not doing that part of it, then what we're doing is the traditional traditional shamanic work where we're identifying the imprint that has been impressioned into their subtle energy field, similar to a neural pathway. So if somebody's imprint is it's safer to be alone, and that's played out in all kinds of ways in their life, maybe they experienced trauma at such a level that it was safer to be alone, but maybe that's not working for them so much at age 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and they'd like to shift that. So we blow that imprint. I don't expect my clients to be able to find the imprint. That's my job. That's my job to track into the whole time I'm asking questions and listening, like what is the impression and the imprint that's been formed, the samskara that's been formed inside of this person, that if this were to be released, their experience of life would be different. Their experience of themselves in life would be different, that they could become a deeper ally for their own spirit and create their lives more like they'd like them to be. We blow that into a stone, a rock, or something that's called a mesa. But mesa in the Karo tradition means the table at which we sit with the divine. It's a bag of rocks that the shamanic practitioner has done their own healing work with, that they continue to do healing work with, and that they can support others in doing their healing work with. When that stone is placed onto, even remotely on the chakra system, there are practices that are become enabled, like illumination, extraction, soul retrieval, destiny retrieval, that help a person have deeper freedom and have more flow of the energetic inside of them. There's the whole Ghostbuster aspect of this work that we can, talk about there. I tend to demystify it a little bit, to be honest. I'm a science geek. And so I love, if we look at the body and we look at how somebody can pick up a virus or an infection, like if you have a cut in your skin and you roll around in the dirt and dirt gets in it and that dirt has a particular bacteria in it, you can pick up a bacterial infection, right? So in energy, it works the same way, that we can pick up energetic viruses, basically. They're energies that are not entirely us, but they have an affinity and they've gotten in through an opening in our field. And openings in our field can happen due to trauma. It can happen due to stress. It can also happen due to substance use. That substance can push an eject button and it sends some of the yellow liquid, not all of it, and it can blow a hole in the field. So the liquid goes out through the hole in the field and it's out there kind of in cyberspace. And then when the substance wears off, sometimes not all of that yellow liquid that we identify with as self comes back into the body. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and often there's still a hole blown in the field. During the time that we were out, we've left the body as a vacuum. We know from the human genome experiment and study and research that 90% of us is not entirely us. Like we're made up of microorganisms, of bacteria. It's fascinating, really. So it's not the end of the world if we pick up an energetic virus. It doesn't, like, this is not to scare anybody. And the reality is most of us do need to have some of that removed from our system.
Well, I think it's also actually important to point out that in your sessions, you are not using any substances. A lot of people hear the word shaman or shamanic practice, and they think that they may take some sort of substance to get to a certain place. And that's not how you work.
Right. My medicine is really to help people connect to the absolute supreme consciousness that is them, that is inside of them, that they're connected to all the time, even when we can't feel it. And I think it's also maybe important to note that there may be people who have businesses, and I didn't share that when you asked me in my one-on-one work. Most of my work is working with CEOs, their teams and companies, and their families. Most of my work is focused on people in a leadership position in some way, shape, or form, whether they're leading their family or they're leading a Fortune 100 company. And it's global. What I'm able to do is go in and support leaders in attuning and aligning more with that supreme consciousness, such that every product and service that is created is more aligned and attuned to what we want to leave to the planet, to our children's children, and so forth. So that's kind of my mission inside of it. It's like, why am I working with leaders? It's because I'm interested in shifting culture.
And I also want to bring up two other more specific things that have to do with your process and what can happen within a session. One is time travel. So let's talk about that. And I think for some people, they're picturing themselves like getting into some sort of time machine.
That's what I'm picturing.
I feel like you can clarify what that is.
So I'm very practical in my spirituality, and I really believe in giving people real life, real world tools to be able to utilize. So as Robyn shared and alluded to, we are time traveling all the time. So right now, if I were to say middle school, what images does that bring up for us, or junior high school, or age 13? What images does that in moments in our lives does that, or in other people's lives, that we've witnessed, what does that bring up for us? And now guess what? We're not here at the current age. We're back there at 13. So we've just time traveled to the past. And if it's a moment that was really painful, we might be feeling all of the feelings that we were feeling in that moment. So let's say it was a moment that we felt insecure, or we felt ostracized, or we felt other than, or we felt separate than. We can be right there in that moment of feeling all those feelings, even though we're here in this other decade-old body. In 2020, it's as if we're not. And so that's an example of traveling back in time. There's been so many advances inside of psychology. So this is not to discredit any of the amazing advances that have happened inside of psychology, which are profound. But in the past, psychology was really only looking at past and trying to heal our current situations by repairing something from the past, or by revisiting something from the past. And what we've learned is that that's one way of healing things, and that's one way of looking at things. But then there's also this way of going into the future of what if we could actually, envision ourselves 5 years from now. What if 5 years from now you actually knew, like we all on this call knew, even if we don't have words for it, even if we don't have an image for it, but there was a sense of it. And there was a sense that we were an ally to it, that we were encouraging that. And imagine that we were 5 years out on that journey, that we've already accomplished that. And now we're in the future. So it's this time travel. And then we can take that greatness and bring it back into the present. If you think about it in terms of neural pathways, and I'm not a neuropsychologist and I'm not a neuroscientist, this is my layperson's experience of that. It is as if we're laying down this new trail, as if it's a neural pathway that's now been established of now we have this sense of 5 years from now, we've been a spirit ally for ourselves, that we're living more and more of our purpose, and we've brought it back here now. So that's an example of time travel.
Can you just talk for a moment about destiny path and what that means?
Some of what I'm about to share, I want to credit to the Four Winds Society and what I learned there. And then some of it is how I've learned kind of on my own. I'm going to go sideways for a minute to answer this question. In the 70s, there was a very popular coffee table art object. And it was this sculpture that if you imagine taking like a stack of thin metal pickup sticks and you glued the bottom of them to a base and the top of it fountained out upward, that's what a destiny tunnel looks like. When we're in alignment and we're feeling joy, we have that inner knowing that we're on our path. Our life might not look exactly like what we want it to yet, but we know that we're aligned with something bigger than ourselves and also ourselves. And there's that attunement kind of feeling to it, like a tuned instrument. And then we're closer into the center of that destiny tunnel. What can also happen though is we can hit these forks in the road. We choose to marry a certain partner, or we choose to take a certain job, or we choose to move to a certain location, or it's like left or right. It's kind of like in Wizard of Oz with the scarecrow. And it's like, do you want to go this way or this way? Right. And it's this like Dorothy's standing there like, I don't know which way I should go. And part of her journey is like figuring out, like listening to that inner knowing space. I know very few people, if know people that have gone through this lifetime without taking a divergent path for a while and suffering a bit and then needing to get back onto their path. Most of us, if not all of us, have at some point said yes to something that was really a no, or said no to something that was really a yes. And when we do that, what happens on our destiny path is it doesn't look that far off at the base. So the base, it might just look like a few centimeters off. But if you follow that up to the top of the trajectory a few decades out, you're very far from where you had intended to be. You might be a few feet apart. And in energetic kind of cyberspace, you might be miles off. So how do you know if you're off from your destiny path? You know because you're suffering. It hurts your heart. It hurts like your mind and your heart are in conflict almost all the time, and gut, like you're just in inner conflict. You can't line up inside yourself, but you deeply want to. And so when that happens, there is something called a destiny retrieval. Energy alchemy practitioners can go in and find, shamanic practitioners can go in and find the part of us that is stuck at choice point. Robyn, may I use your example?
Absolutely. Yes.
So in Robyn's example that she shared, she knew all of her life really that she was supposed to have a show, like there was something about that was part of her journey. And yet she may have been slightly off from that. And then eventually there was a choice point of of feeling like I need to actually get back on to that journey. My job is to go out and to find the energetic that is off and bring it into alignment, because it's really, really hard for us to jump across those sticks. Can you do this on your own? It's possible. Yes, you can. Is it hard? Yes. And when you feel a destiny retrieval, what happens is it's almost like a sailboat, like the winds have shifted. You feel like you're a sailboat and the winds are now blowing in the direction that gets you back on course, or that is the course. But you have to learn how to move the sails to catch the new winds. This work is not magic. Does it have magical aspects to it? Yes. Does it have mystical aspects to it? Yes. And we have to row our own boat. We have to move our own sails. Nobody's going to do this for you. You have to still, like Robyn talked about, she filled out the questionnaire and she, did it intently. And then it became a resource for her years later to still stay on course and move the sails in that direction to catch the winds.
Exactly. I love the way that you put that and that visual, because it's so true. You can help get us back on course, but then we have to actually do the work to get there.
I'm sure so many people right now are resonating with what you're saying about getting off course and not knowing how to find their way back. They may not even recognize they even had that destiny path in the first place.
Yes. And what if even the times when we said yes to a no or no to a yes, we went what seems to be the wrong way on the path was still the right way on the path, because we wouldn't have known and we wouldn't have learned from suffering. We wouldn't have learned those things that we learned of this is how it feels when you go off path. Like it's all part of the journey, right? I think much of the suffering that's happening is that we don't actually know how to pay attention to ourselves, and we need to learn and pattern new ways.
And that leads to then any thoughts or wisdom that you can share with us about what's going on in our world right now in 2020 and moving forward.
Yes. So in the Karo ways, they called 2020 the Pachakudi. Pacha meaning infinite time and space. Like many people have heard the word Pachamama, which means infinite time, space, mama, which in part is used to reference to the earth, but it's much more than the earth. Infinite time, space, mama, that is always holding us. So Pachakudi is infinite time, space turning over. So there are a lot of prophecies around 2012. I know we're talking about 2020 right now, but I have to frame it. So we thought that what that was going to look like, here's an hourglass. We'll just turn the hourglass over. 2013, we're good. January 2nd, here we go. And what we learned was that that's not exactly how it works in infinite time, space. But what we've been seeing around that time period, we saw banks collapsing. We saw real estate market collapsing. There are systems that we've outgrown in our culture. Like even now, 2020, our education system, there are amazing teachers. There are amazing administrators doing amazing work and have had to turn on a dime with very limited resources, frankly, to do right by children. And this is first to honor every single one of them, and also to honor that our systems need to evolve. We're in a time period of great transition, great transformation, and great change. Look, we've heard about, like, even our grandparents talk about when appliances were made, they were made to last a lifetime. Some of us may be old enough to remember when appliances lasted a long time, but now they're made to last purposely a limited, more finite time. That means that we have more garbage going where? Into the oceans, into landfills. These are all signs that our culture is inside out, upside down. We are taking more from the earth at a faster rate than she can reproduce it. We are not in Ayni, A-Y-N-I. Ayni is what the Karo call right relationship. It means imbalance. We're out of balance and it needs to turn over. In the tantric studies, we talk about the Kali Yuga. It's the same. It's like in ancient traditions. It's been talked about the same way. The Kali Yuga, we're coming out of this time period of iron ages, the dark time period, the dark ages, where the world has been inside out, upside down. And we're heading into the Sat Yuga, this time of truth, this age of enlightenment. And one of my teachers inside of this tantric lineage talks about how we can each have our own Sat Yuga, that we actually don't have to wait for critical mass. Where we're at right now in the world is that we're amidst a great transformation and there is great suffering. There is a disease of our culture that needs to remedy itself, that needs to move into a more healed state. At the same time, it is all the divine. So it is wholeness moving towards greater wholeness. We have an opportunity for each one of us to listen listen to what is most true, not what is most ingrained, not as what is best propagandized, not what is popular in our social circuit or with our family or anything really, other than our relationship inside of ourselves with what is that absolute consciousness, what is that absolute truth, what is going to create more of that in the world, and how do we align with that and show up more and more as that in the world, even if it's not popular, even if it's not accepted, even if it's not encouraged. How do we continue to right the ship inside of ourselves? It takes great courage and deep meditation and deep stillness, deep fortification and deep resiliency. And it's important that each of us builds that fortification. It's important that each of us builds that resiliency inside of us to keep bringing forth and ushering forth what we want to leave to our children's children.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I used to always say you're the ultimate life coach. You're actually the ultimate soul coach.
Thank you. Beautiful.
There's a lot that is going to stay with everybody listening and watching today. So thank you so much. We love you.
Love you too. Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. If you're interested in working with Sheryl, please visit goodenergyheals.com.